Now let me explain measures of variation. Another important characteristic of quantitative data is how much the data varies or is spread out. Under this, I am going to talk about three most common methods. First one, range. Second, standard deviation and variance. Third, interquartile range. In this video, I am going to talk about first and second one. First, range. What is the range? The difference between the maximum and the minimum. The data must be quantitative. So, range equal maximum data entry minus minimum data entry. Now let me explain an example. The following data represent the length of the long jump. Determine the range length of the long jump. Yes, we know range is maximum minus minimum. Maximum is 5, minimum is 2.3. So range is 5 minus 2.3. It is 2.7. Now let me explain sample variance and sample standard deviation. Before I go to the sample variance, let me explain some definitions. First, deviation of the mean. That is observation minus mean. That means x minus x bar. So next is square deviation. We know deviation of the mean, then we get the second power of that. Next one, sum of square deviation. Okay, first one was the deviation of the mean. Second one, the square deviation. That means get the second power of the deviation of the mean. And the third one, sum of square deviation means we add them together, add the square deviation together. So this is very important. Why? Sum of deviation always 0. It is not the second power. Okay, they just sum of the deviation, not the square sum of square deviation, right? Sum of the deviation always 0 of any data set. Now let me explain this example. Consider the following data set. There are 5 data or 5 observations. Then how do we find the sum of the deviation? Right. First, let me make the table, and in the first column, I write the observations. There are 5 observations. Therefore, x1, x2 up to x5. You can write this way since there are 5 observations. In next, I find the deviation of each observation. What is the deviation? Xi minus x bar. So how do you find the deviation of the first observation? That is 5.2. To find the deviation, we need to find x bar first, right? Once we have x bar, we can subtract x bar from the 5.2. Okay, first let me find the x bar. X bar is 5. X bar is 7.3. Right. Now we can find the deviation of each observation. That is the first one, 5.2 minus 7.3, that is 2.1 negative. Similarly, you can find the deviation of the rest of the observations. Now, let me show you the sum of the deviation. As I explained before, sum of the deviation is summation I goes from 1 to 5, xi minus x bar. Those are the actually values of the second column, right? You can expand this like this. So again, the summation or sum of the value of the second column. So what is that? As I mentioned before, it must be 0. Yes, it is 0. Therefore, understand always of any data set, the sum of the deviation is 0. Okay, sum of the deviation is 0. Now let me explain sample variance and sample standard deviation. What is the sample variance? We use the s to power 2. That is the notation, s to power 2. So that is sum or summation, I goes from 1 to n, xi minus x bar to power 2 divided by n minus 1. If I expand this one without summation, you can write like this. Okay, this is the sample variance. So you see that here, how do we find the sample variance? First, you need to find the x bar, then find the deviation of each observation, and then we get the second power of the deviation. Then we add them together and divide up by n minus 1. What is the n? N is the number of observations. Then how do we find the sample standard deviation? The notation of the sample standard deviation is S, that is the square root of the sample variance. So to find the sample deviation, standard deviation, first you need to find the sample variance, then get the square root of that number or square root of the sample variance. Right. Now let me explain one example. Then I explain more example in my next videos. Find the sample variance and the standard deviation of the following sample. How many data here? 3 data. Therefore, n equal 3. 6, 3, 9. Those are the observations, right? Data, right. So, sample variance is this. And you can write the same one in this form without summation part, right? Okay. According to this, what is the x1? What is the x2? Yes, let me show you. x1 I take 6, x2 is 3, x3 is 9. Actually, in this case, you don't have to arrange your data in increasing order. Okay, so just use any data x1, x2, x3 as you wish. Right. Now, first thing we need to find the x bar. Yes, we know already how to find x bar. It is 6 for this case. Then we can plug the numbers to the formula. It is s to power 2 is 9. You see x1 is 6, then 6 minus 6 to power 2 plus, then x2 is 3, then x bar is 6, 3 minus 6 to power 2 plus x3 is 9 minus 6 is the x bar power 2 divided by n minus 1. N is 3 minus 1, then that is 2, then answer is 9. Right. We have sample variance. Then how do we find the sample standard deviation? As I explained before, sample standard deviation is the square root of the sample variance. Then we know sample variance is 9. So square root of 9 is 3. Therefore, sample standard deviation is 3. Right. I hope you have an idea how to find the sample variance and sample standard deviation. And also you have to understand the definitions I explained here, I defined here. So main thing you can remember deviation of the observations and the second power of the deviations and the sum of the deviation, right? Then you should know how to find the variance and the sample standard deviation. I am going to explain a few more examples in my next videos.